Forced to work from home by your employer? Laid off or feeling depressed at home? Do you want to make money working from anywhere? We'll show you how to do it from your couch. It's time for another episode of the Work From Home Show. Coming to you from their homes in Austin, Texas and Tampa, Florida, here are your hosts, Adam and Naresh.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Work From Home Show. I'm Naresh Vessa with Adam Schrader. Shout out to all our homies, homeboys, homegirls, home trans, all the work from homers out there. Today we have Congressman Dennis Kucinich on the show. You've probably heard of him if you've been around a few years. If you were around in 2004, 2008, he was a presidential candidate for the Democrat Party. He's a Ohio congressman from 1997 to 2013. He's the former chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. We'll talk a little bit about that. He's the author of the new best-selling book, The Division of Light and Power. So without further ado, Mr. Dennis Kucinich, thank you for joining us on the Work From Home Show.
Thank you very much for the invitation. And, I know people sometimes have trouble with my name. It took me years to learn how to pronounce it, but it is Kucinich. And I did represent Cleveland area in the United States Congress for 16 years. The book that I've written, The Division of Light and Power, is the story of the beginning of my career when I went to the Cleveland City Council and had the opportunity as a young councilman, 23 years old, to explore the depth of involvement of various interest groups, and in particular the political corruption that was going on to undermine the city's municipal electric system. And I was quite alarmed when I saw that, and I started to take very careful notes about the machinations of the political system working with a monopoly utility conspiring to sell the city's municipally owned electric system. So the book begins there with a blackout in December of 1969, and the lights keep going out. And when you find out why the lights keep going out, it's shocking. And so the story opens there, and it goes right until my election as mayor, and through those years, which describe the tremendous battle that took place between my office, the utility monopolies, the banks, and the mob.
Wow, that sounds scary. Let's talk a little bit more about that. I'm especially curious to learn more about just a little more detail on how you fought to beat this utility monopoly and also the corporate espionage and sabotage, bank co-conspirators, organized crime. There were even assassination attempts, I believe.
Right, exactly. Well, here's the way it came out. Cleveland has had its own municipal electric system, public power, since the turn of the 20th century. And it has competed side by side in a third of the city with a private investor-owned utility, the Cleveland Electric Illuminating Company, also known as CEI. CEI tried to block the formation of Muni Light right in its inception. They were not successful in doing that. Over the years, though, they began to secretly plan and then execute a strategy to undermine the city's municipally owned utility by blocking repairs in the Cleveland City Council, which were needed to help the city's capacity to generate electricity. They also started a PR campaign with the general media, where they advertised heavily, to attack and undermine the city's utility and public ownership. Furthermore, the city, when the private utility successfully blocked any repairs to the city's generators, the city had to turn outside and say, we've got to buy power from somewhere else. CEI blocked the city from buying power outside the city. And then the city could only get power from CEI, and CEI tripled the cost, so they would run up the city's operating expenses. And then finally, we were fighting for a connection. In Texas, Texas found out about the importance of being able to connect outside your territory for power if you have a shutdown, as you experienced with ERCOT in the early part of this year.
Yeah, that was fun.
And so what happened is that here's the thing: being connected to the grid nationally was vital for the city of Cleveland, but CEI blocked us from getting connected to the national grid, so we were isolated. So we had to rely on them for backup power in case we had an outage, which, became likely because we weren't able to fix our equipment. And the book documents how some of the blackouts that the city experienced were actually created by CEI so that they could try to use that as an excuse to push the sale. And the public didn't understand this. They didn't understand why, when the city needed a transfer of power from CEI operated that transfer in such a way as to deliberately create a blackout on the muni system. And that's all documented in the book. And so, the kind of dirty tricks that went on were extraordinary. And CEI got their comeuppance because they were found by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to have violated numerous provisions of antitrust law. And they tried price fixing, cutthroat competition. And in the midst of all this, the city council was going to sell our municipal electric system, even though they knew that CEI had been undermining it and was trying to buy our system for a fraction. I mean, this is a story of something that is unprecedented in U.S. history, that this would come out. The kind of underhandedness that was going on with this utility, all in their plans to try to take over the city-owned electric system. And so some people have compared the book to the movie Chinatown, which involved water, whereas this involves electricity. So I was elected mayor on a platform to save our municipal electric system. I got elected. I canceled a sale which had been consummated, and we just won that by the skin of our teeth. Won the issue by the skin of our teeth. And the second part of the book opens up on this, on the saga that happened and how the utility monopoly, the banks and other corporate interests put a tremendous squeeze on the city to try to force me as the mayor to give up our electric system.
This sounds very similar to a lot of other bigger, not bigger necessarily, but other issues going on a national scale with the push towards privatization, where it seems like there's a lot of issues where politicians nationally are willing to let some programs just deteriorate and get worse so that they can kind of push the whole, well, if the private sector did it, it would be better. Let's get it out of the hands of the government and give it to private companies. How do we as citizens push back against that? Because, if I don't agree with it and I need to talk to my congressional representative, I'm one of, a couple million that they represent or 100,000 that they represent, and I feel like just throwing a pebble in a river. How does a normal citizen fight back against that?
Well, first of all, I want to say that you have correctly identified the urgency of this book at this time, because there are increased privatization efforts underway, and they will accelerate once the American Rescue Plan money dries up, in city after city. So, first of all, you have to, when you see a privatization effort underway, start asking questions right away, like why? I will promise you that every privatization effort results in the public assets being stolen. You can make an issue out of how much is being paid for that electric system, water system, whatever, because I will guarantee you every municipal asset that's ever up for privatization is being undervalued. That was part of our story. It was, for example, the CEI was ready to purchase Muni Light in Cleveland for $88.1 million. And we determined that the value of it was at least $250 million plus the loss to the taxpayers that would come when the taxpayers would have to pay the full rate plus the rate increases to the private utility would have to pay for street lighting and service to the city facilities to the private utility, and pay a premium price. And so taxes were going to go up, and ratepayers who were forced to buy the private power would also see their budgets cut into by increased utility costs. Privatization can and is often a nightmare for communities. This book shows how to fight it. But the biggest and most important way is you have to do your homework. You have to do the research. You have to pay attention to what's going on, not to what the media is saying, because all too often corporate media ignores the needs of the people and instead serves the needs of narrow economic interests that are going to capitalize on a privatization. Now, this battle in Cleveland, which was unprecedented, drew in a bank which told me on December 15, 1978, that either you, the mayor, the bank will not renew the city's credit on loans I hadn't even taken out. And so I had to make a decision what I stood for. I told them no. It turned out the bank was a business partner of the utility. They stood to profit as well from the privatization.
Shocking.
And the banks would check this out. So the people of Cleveland followed my leadership and increased their taxes. They taxed themselves more to pay off the defaulted notes on loans I hadn't taken out. And when the tax passed, the banks who had proposed the tax to pay off the notes and who said that if you pass the tax, we'll take you out of default, they reneged on their commitment and kept the city into default until I left office. And in addition to that, they had agreed to abide by the decision of the voters on the question of Muni Light. People voted 2-1 to keep Muni Light. The banks and the corporate community turned around after the people voted 2-1 to say, nope, you got to sell that system. I mean, so I was 31 years old, and I stood against this crude, extortionate exercise of corporate power that really was, it was so intent on having its way that they were prepared to destroy the city to get a monopoly on electricity. But, we stopped them.
First off, did the corporation, the electric company, did they try to pay you or buy you off? And how easy is it for corporations to buy off politicians?
Well, it's called campaign contributions, big ones. No, what happened was this. The day of default, the biggest bank told me, hey, look, if you go ahead with this sale, we'll loan the city $50 million, and you can do whatever you want with it. It was like a express pass to re-election. All of a sudden you could start paving the streets in gold. And but of course, I knew, they were asking. I mean, it was a fraud. They wanted me to give up an electric system that was worth more money than the monopoly was ready to pay for it, and they were going to let the city borrow more money. I mean, give me a break. I was, as I said, I was a very young person. I suppose they felt they could roll me at that point. I looked younger than I was, and I think I had a certain amount of disbelief, cognitive dissonance, saying, oh, geez, how can this be happening with this kid who's the mayor? I was the youngest mayor in America at the time of any big city. But the task that I took on was one where I had to take a stand against these corporate interests that were determined to have their way, even if it meant smearing the very city in which they operated.
I want to touch on you becoming mayor there. What made you, and it always amazes me when people go into politics in general. Like, I have a friend who's, one of my best friends is a mayor of a city here in Texas, but it's like a 2,000 person town, so it's nothing like Cleveland. What made you decide, like, was it the electric situation that made you think you should go into public office, or what led you to think I should get involved in politics?
Well, I entered politics at the age of 20 as a candidate for city council. And I got involved because, growing up in the era of the 60s, the change was in the wind. And I felt the best way to change things was to go inside the system. And I've always felt from a spiritual standpoint that my life didn't belong just to me, that all of our lives belong to community, that, while we can make our own choices, that we should always try to do something for the betterment of society and not just take care of, we have to take care of ourselves, but we also need to think of others as well. So that was the spirit that I brought into public life, not to do well, but to do good. And and that brought me into a contest for city council. I was elected on my second try by 16 votes. I beat an entrenched Democratic machine to be elected to the council. And the story opens up on at Christmas time in 1969 with this holiday season blackout, which, as we found out later on, these blackouts were being created by this private utility in there as part of their scheme to take over the public system. So, I started very early. I made a choice early to go on the inside. So I was motivated by, wanting to be of service, and I still am.
Shifting gears just a little bit, you chaired the Congressional Progressive Caucus to lessen income inequality way back in the early 2000s. The latest figures I've seen, income inequality has only gotten worse. Can you explain why that is and what the initial goal of the CPC was and what's gone wrong with it?
Well, first of all, the Congressional Progressive Caucus has had, a number of really important leaders, including Bernie Sanders, Pete DeFazio, and others. And the purpose of the caucus was to present a different approach to management of the government's resources. So we presented our own budget, which emphasized healthcare and education and housing, and de-emphasized war and military spending. The whole idea was about revisiting our what is necessary to support people in our society, to support their existence. So this caucus has members who are quite diverse in their politics, and occasionally they'll vote as a bloc on certain issues in Congress. It may happen less and less now. There's a lot more pressure in Congress now. Things are much more polarized, and every organization within the Congress is perhaps more fractionated than it's ever been. And so that is indeed a problem.
So how do we combat income inequality today then?
First of all, every able-bodied person should have an opportunity to make a living. And if the private sector can't provide the jobs, the public sector has to. I mean, we're in an interesting position right now in the COVID era where the economy is starting to move ahead, but there are so many job openings now. People are just getting back into a mode of first of all, work's being redefined, and secondly, there's a lot of jobs out there that are wanting. So it's a little bit different than it was a few years ago, where the economy was being managed in such a way that a certain amount of unemployment was seen as being necessary to the proper functioning of the economy. We don't seem to have that right now, but I think that it would be good if the government created a jobs program that gave people an opportunity to do long-term productive work in restoring our environment and in helping to repair our infrastructure. And the other thing is that having work with no benefits is, quite a challenge. People are finding that the cost of healthcare is extraordinary, and being able to meet your healthcare needs of your family might be almost impossible, even though you may have a job that is paying you more than $15 an hour. So the COVID added a layer of complexity to this question of employment and meaningful work, and it's going to, I think, take a while to sort that out. But I think our polar star has to be a full employment economy with meaningful, productive work available to all those who are able to work, and with supportive systems for those who for no fault of their own, cannot work.
You touched on the polarization in Congress right now. When you were in Congress, was it more friendly? Were people more friendly? Were Republicans more friendly to you? Were politicians more willing to work together? Or
well, let me tell you, yes and no. There's always a certain amount of political polarity that exists. I mean, the very basis of a two-party system is, by its definition, polarized. You have Democrats, you have Republicans, and for some people, never the twain shall meet. I did it differently. I worked on both sides of the aisle. And as a result, I had the opportunity to make uncommon friendships with people on the Republican side, including those in the Texas delegation. I'll tell you a story to give you an example. The Clinton administration was looking for authorization to continue the bombing of Serbia, and they were, and to keep the war going over there. And I was opposed to that. So the authorization, I think it was Senate Joint Resolution 21, came up in 1999, and I was trying to figure out a way to defeat it. And finally, I came upon a plan that would have required the help of the Republicans. So I went to Tom DeLay, and I explained to him what my objective was. Now, he may have had some political strategy in mind, but the long story short is we put together a coalition of Republicans and Democrats, and we stopped the war. Now, somebody would say, well, DeLay would never go along with something like that. Well, he did, and we worked together, and we stopped a war that should have never been fought by. And so, what I'm saying is that forget about party, forget about ideology, look to what your goals are and see if you can find a way to get alliances at certain times and places, and you might be surprised. So I never, when people, when I'm looking for an ally, I don't care about party at all. I mean, I've worked with Ron Paul on so many of Texas, on so many issues of foreign policy, and we found that while we had differences on domestic policy, we worked together to try to limit U.S. involvement in these wars. And, that's why I'm saying there might be polarization today, but it's often mindless. People, need to talk to one another and find out what they actually stand for. And like in any family, you may not agree, even within a family, with each other on something that could be very important. You look to those things you can agree on, and that's where you do your work. And so that's what, that was my approach in Congress, and I think that approach could still work today.
We've talked about kind of money in politics being an issue and buying off politicians. You look at what's happening today in, congressional races, especially presidential races. I mean, you see campaigns spending, $1 billion+ for a job that makes $400,000 a year. And, there's a whole lot more to it than, just the job and the salary. Obviously being president has so much power in it. And you also see it in congressional races where money from all over the country flows into one specific state. How do we keep our politicians in a way that the community can still show their support for them, but they're not being completely bought off?
Well, going back to the book, The Division of Light and Power, when these corporations had their interest, I never went to them for money. So nobody forces an elected official or somebody running for office to go to a certain group and say, hey, give me money. I mean, that's where it begins. And when they do give money, nobody forces you to take that money if they offer it to you. So, it's not as though we're just helpless, because those who aspire to office have to be very careful about who is providing contributions to them, and to make sure that you can be independent of those contributions and function autonomously without the largesse which comes into campaign coffers. And that is very tough. I mean, what I'm prescribing here is not easy. But the book, the Division of Light and Power, points out that when people organize at a community level, they can overcome almost any interest group. But, it's the organization and the knowledge of what is actually happening that empowers people to overcome the influence of money. I mean, we were heavily outspent in Cleveland on every election that involved either with my name on the ballot or an issue-oriented election. We were heavily outspent. But because we aligned with the popular interest and helped people understand their interest, we won anyway. Now, I eventually was defeated in 1979 because the banks kept the city into default, and people at that time did not understand why, despite having paid more money on their taxes, we were still in default. But years later, now the people of Cleveland understand it. So yeah, campaign contributions can totally corrupt the system, but no one forces these candidates to take that money. And if they do take the money, then that needs to be noted by the voters to see if those interests align with the more specific concerns of the electorate.
That's Congressman Dennis Kucinich. Dennis Kucinich, thank you so much for joining us on the Work From Home show. Your latest book is called The Division of Light and Power. The Division of Light and Power. Right. And your website is kucinich.com.
Well, they can go to finneyavenuebooks.com, where they can purchase a book through many different links, or they can go to Barnes & Noble, Target, Amazon. There's a whole list of places you can get the book. Go to your local bookstore and ask for it. And if they don't have it in stock, they'll order it, and you'll have it shortly.
And your website is kucinich.com. Congressman Dennis Kucinich, any final thoughts you want to share with our listeners, or anything else you want to promote?
No, I mean, I appreciate being on your show, and in this virtual book tour that I'm doing from house to house with your help is very important. I mean, this book, it took me 40 years to write it. It is thoroughly documented, and I've been told that there's never been a book quite like this that explains the political process from an insider's point of view. And again, it's one thing to fight City Hall from the outside. Try fighting City Hall when you're the mayor.
Yeah, completely understood. This is a wild, wild story. I'm going to have to check out the book. So once again, The Division of Light and Power. Get the book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever you get your books. Congressman Dennis Kucinich, thank you once again for joining us on the Work From Home show. To all our listeners, check us out at workfromhomeshow.com. Email us if you have any questions, hello@workfromhomeshow.com. You can follow us on all social media, leave us a review on whatever podcasting platform you use. And until next week, keep on working from home.